Yeah.
Oh, gotta get there fast, Sean.
Yeah.
Gotta get there fast, Sean.
Hello Britball Nation and welcome to The Scoop following week 6 of the 16-17 Bucks Uniball season. We've been reliably informed that on Sundays some of the Britball Nation actually do something other than pay attention to our manic live coverage of each and every Britball game. Little things like working, supporting or even playing in the actual games themselves all rather inconveniently get in the way of keeping yourself up to speed with the results and ramifications from across the nation. Never fear, DC is here with a scoop of the important bits from the past weekend of Britball. It wasn't quite the final weekend of Uniball before the Christmas break, as we're currently aware of a single fixture planned for this Sunday as the Swansea Titans head to Hertfordshire. The Titans have finally had their win streak broken in the Lions' Den and will be out for retribution, whereas Hearts are undefeated so far this season and will want to enter the Christmas break perfect at 5-0. However, that's next weekend and we'll worry about that in our prediction. As you'll see, we've worked really hard to contact every single team that played at the weekend and get hold of whatever tape we can wherever it's been made available. So our thanks to those teams that stepped up, especially those who offered up tape without even being asked this week. While we're talking about tape and before we jump into the games, just a quick note to keep an eye out for some very exciting announcements this week about tape submissions. Many of you probably know, but even so we won't spoil it by talking about it now, but let's just say it's been a great year for Britball and we want to celebrate it with the whole of the Britball Nation as we approach the end of 2016. All that said, let's take a look back at the past weekend of Britball. We'll start with the games that didn't happen, and frustratingly there were once again a number of them. Oddly, this year the weather is yet to have that much of an impact on games, with only 2 fixtures confirmed rained off so far this season and 1 pushed back due to a frozen pitch. Nonetheless, we lost the Dragons fixture once again this weekend, and while the Dragons themselves remain optimistic that they'll have something of a season, the reality is we're at the halfway point of the year and they're yet to have either enough players or coaches to be able to take the field. Now, in all likelihood, the lack of coaches, seemingly due to the fault of their athletic union, is more than likely the cause for their lack of players, but either way it does little to help a conference that will go into the mid-season break having only played 5 games on the field across the 8 teams that entered the conference at the beginning of the year. Yep. The 2A South East so far this season has 4 walkovers versus LSB Youth, 3 fixtures postponed due to Westminster's lack of players and coaches, 2 ARU fixtures pushed back for the wrong jerseys, Therefore, you can understand UEL's frustration coming into this weekend when they learned that Greenwich Mariners were unwilling to play them unless the game were officiated by BAFRA officials. The issue seemed to stem back to the fixture between the two last year, which Greenwich won 30-0. Sources close to the disagreement claim this is because Greenwich believe UEL took advantage of the lack of officials at the last meeting between these two teams to field ineligible players, not that it appeared to affect the outcome of the game. Long and short of it, however, the UEL Phoenix are going to go into the Christmas break without a single game played despite being willing and raring to go for each of their fixtures. Hawu postponed their game against Teesside due to the Scottish exams period, and DMU pushed back their fixture against MMU due to the lack of a pitch to play on 6 weeks into the season. You see, Division 2, this is why we can't have nice things. Still, Division 1 also had a fixture fall, as Rural apparently only realised with 4 days to go that their tilt against Kent on Sunday would mean players sticking around after term had ended, and while Kent seemed less than pleased to have the fixture pushed back due to a lack of available dates for their rematch, hopefully this is something that can be resolved and the game should still be completed. Much as last week, there were no burgers again this weekend, which in many cases speaks volumes of how competitive the season we're having, but you also have to consider the number of games we've had called either at the half or at least before the end of regulation, and therefore have to ask whether the mercy clock is actually doing anything other than cutting games short and not allowing teams to rotate their roster depth. Teams have displayed that they are quite willing, even if they're never happy to do so, to call a game off when they believe continuing is only going to put their players at risk. As such, so long as coaches and training staff are making responsible decisions in the best interest of their players, you have to wonder whether the mercy clock rule may now actually begin to have a negative impact on player safety by allowing fewer and fewer opportunities to rotate players and give them valuable game time experience. Anyhow, on to the football. The balling kicked off on Saturday as we had a game from each tier, and as is becoming the trend, the Saturday balling set the tone for the weekend as we saw highs and lows across the fixtures. We've just discussed games being called early, so we'll start with that one. Between injuries and the game being shifted to a Saturday, meaning reportedly a good number of their players and coaches had to work, the Edge Hill Vikings made their trip across the Leeds with only 20 available players and without their head coach. Losing 4 further players due to injury left the Vikings down 28-6 at the half, and with only 16 players left standing against a large and hard-hitting Leeds Griffins side. Despite the desire of the players to carry on, the team physio made the probably wise recommendation to Edge Hill's coaches to wave the white flag and protect the players they had remaining, leaving Leeds to go into the break undefeated and with their Week 10 match against Liverpool circled on their schedule. In the 1A Northwestern, the UCAM Rams welcomed the Sheffield Sabres to their home field where they've historically been at their best, and Saturday was no exception. The Rams were playing with a chip on their shoulder after back-to-back losses to Hallam Warriors and Leeds Carnegie, and the Sabres themselves were without their starting quarterback after he suffered a broken leg in the Steel Bowl preview in Week 4. The Rams racked up 40 unanswered points on the Sabres and go into the break at a respectable 2-2 with revenge on their mind, while the Sabres meanwhile will have to ask a lot of questions of themselves over the break if they want to refine the form necessary to compete in this tough conference. Finally, the obvious headliner from Saturday was the Premiership South clash between the Swansea Titans and the reigning national champions, the Birmingham Lions. The Lions were coming in off a 2-game skid, probably their first in over a decade, whereas the Titans boasted the longest win streak in the league with a record of 38-3 over the past 3 seasons. Still, it would have been asking an awful lot for an upstart side like Swansea to displace a national champion their first year in the Premiership, and ultimately the Lions' experience won through with the form that so nearly saw them topple Hertfordshire the preceding weekend, enough to keep the edge over the Titans. Swansea matched the Lions score for score going into the final quarter, but the Lions secondary was having a strong day and the Huxtable-Cotterill connection couldn't quite get its groove on the long passes, allowing the Lions to pull clear for the victory. The Lions will begin to feel they've got their mojo back, and though they'll be looking for outside help if they want to retain their conference crown, it's clear Sammy Lee Baxter and the receiving calls are pulling their weight alongside Elliot Walters now. For the Titans, they'll look to galvanise on the pain of this loss and use it against the Hurricanes in the final fixture of 2016 at Hertfordshire this Sunday, which, by the way, double coverage will be hoping to attend and potentially even stream, so keep an eye out for news on that at the weekend. To Sunday, and the Prem North continues to delight. Don't let the scorelines tell you otherwise, both these games came down to the wire. Saints Braves turned out to be an all-out shootout as the Braves looked to bounce back from their loss against Loughborough by taking down the undefeated Saints. And going into the latter portion of the game, it looked as it might just happen as the Braves quarterback split the safeties to put the Braves 28-20 in the lead. It wasn't to be, however, as the Saints answered with back-to-back scores, only for Derby to come back at them and tie up at 36 apiece. But the Saints found yet another score to wrap up the game 44-36 and go into the break undefeated and having beaten each of their conference opponents, even if 3 of those 4 wins were by a score or less. And it was a similar story in Stirling. The Klansmen were without their starting quarterback Andres Donat Garcia, but wideout and QB2 Alex Crowe stepped up to the plate and led the offense down the field for repeated scores. Even so, as they've been wont to do all season, the Renegades found ways to keep pace with the Klansmen throughout most of the fixture, taking advantage of Stirling mistakes to answer each Clan score. Deep into the fourth, with the game tied at 20-all, the Klansmen found pay dirt once again, and the Renegades were left with very short time on the clock with which to answer. Backed up against their own end zone with mere seconds on the clock, they took a Hail Mary shot downfield, only for GB Lion Ashley Hopkinson to pick it off and return it all the way for his second pick 6 of the game, 4th interception through the 4 quarters, and oh, did we mention this was his second 4-pick game of the season so far? Those are some crazy statistics. Another painfully close loss for the Renegades, who go into the break without a win, but at least with the knowledge that each game they've played there perhaps been only a single play going the other way, away from victory. For the Clan, they certainly felt like this was one of their stronger performances, with the NTU scores largely coming from short fields due to special team miscues and an interception thrown by their 3rd string QB when the game had seemed more locked up early in the second half. Heading south, and while it's fair to say that the Prem North might well be the most hotly contested conference in the league right now, in the Southern Premiership there's a couple of teams that are clearly off the pace at the moment. The Canes are growing in confidence each week, and it was a comprehensive victory over Kingston on Sunday. Speaking with a number of their opponents, the Hurricanes are seemingly the most all-round talented team in the Prem South at the moment, and a win over Swansea this weekend could see them go into the break perfect to 5-0 and looking like one of the favourites to compete for a record 6th College Bowl, separating themselves from the Lions, who tied their record of 5 national championship wins with their win last year. To Division 1, and we'll start in the north where, frankly, we don't have a clue what's going on anymore. Hull travelled up to Glasgow and, despite reporting a number of injuries in key positions, took the Tigers to the sword for a 42-22 win. Glasgow did little to help themselves with repeated turnovers deep in their own territory, and were themselves struggling with a much depleted roster and time for game prep coming into the fixture due to being deep in the Scottish University exams period. The loss is apparently Glasgow's first regular season loss for a whopping 1,029 days, and even though the streak is now at an end, the Tigers should certainly be incredibly proud of that achievement. Still, it's tough to argue this wasn't the perfect way for the Sharks to bounce back following their recent loss against mid-table Northumbria Mustangs, and what makes it even more exciting for the rest of the Britball nation is that this surely sets up an absolute treat of a return leg when Glasgow, in theory returned to full strength by then, travel south to Hull right out of the Christmas break and look to reclaim their spot atop the 1A North. Only adding to our confusion as to how the ground lies in this conference, the Spartans, winless and with only a single score on the season so far coming into the weekend, took the fight to a Newcastle side that appears to be in free fall following a strong start to the season against Northumbria. The victory shifts the Spartans off the bottom of the table, and suddenly the Raiders, who saw playoff falling last year, are under threat of relegation. So, if we look where we had things previously, Newcastle beat Northumbria comfortably, Hull lit up Newcastle for a 50 burger, and then Northumbria took apart Hull. Oh, and Glasgow's now the only undefeated team in the conference. Only now, the Tigers have taken apart Newcastle, Northumbria and Sunderland. In turn, the Spartans have moved above Newcastle with the win, but Northumbria beat Hull convincingly, whereas Hull then put up a 3-score win over Glasgow.
Oh no, I've gone cross-eyed.
I suggest you don't worry about this sort of thing and just enjoy yourself. That goes for you all, too.
Yes.
We'll figure it out in the new year. Should be some cracking games in this conference. Carnegie continue their win streak despite their limited roster size, but the Tyrants certainly asked questions of them this week. Indeed, it was the Barneys that drew first blood with a scoop and score to open the game, and while Leeds Beckett will quickly turn things around and put up a comfortable cushion between the two around the midway point in the fixture, it looks like complacency crept in and the Tyrants punished them for it, finishing the game within a score of getting their first win of the year. To the Midlands, and Warwick took consolation from their loss against Nottingham in week 5 by laying the boom down on LJMU. The Fury appear to have locked themselves in as a capable Div 1 team, but they've perhaps simply found themselves in the wrong conference at the wrong time. Warwick were building up the strength of their bite last year when they were the only team to take out a Premiership-bound NTU and boast a good number of experienced players across all positions, whereas Nottingham, who were disappointed with their 4-4 season last year, really appear to be in a league of their own so far this season, as their tight bond with and great support from their athletic union finally begins to show dividends. To the 1A Southwest, and there were some really interesting scorelines in this conference that are setting up a tasty looking showdown in the second half of the year. The Demons travelled to UE and put in a dominant offensive performance. Their line play is a big reason that the Demons have become formidable as the season progresses, and this is epitomised by the rather impressive statistic that the Exeter offence have allowed just a single sack across their 4 fixtures so far this year. They're finding ways to put up points despite health issues in their backfield, and while they did allow the Bullets their first points of the season, it's fair to say the game was already in the bag by then. In contrast, the short-handed Cobras side, missing 4 starters from their D due to the fixture being played after the Cardiff term had officially ended, travelled to Solent. After the Demons took the Redhawks to task the previous weekend, we were expecting a dominant win for the undefeated Cobras. However, the Redhawks had clearly prepped well coming into this first return fixture of the conference. Both teams were neck and neck throughout the game, and following the Twitter feed of the game, we honestly began to wonder whether either programme actually wanted the win. As tied 20-all, there were turnovers galore, as the Redhawks would cough up the football only for the Cobras to throw it right back to them. As such, perhaps it was quite fitting that the game came to a close with a pick 6 from the Cobras with only 30 seconds on the clock, ensuring Cardiff stay perfect into the break, but Solent certainly put a scare on the conference leaders. With Exeter looking on form, the matchup between these two in week 9 on the eve of the Cobras' 30th anniversary ball should be an absolute cracker. To the 1A South, and things went more or less as expected, with the Saxons and Stingers emerging victorious. The Tsunami at least managed to put up their first points of the year, but it's worth noting that they still weren't produced by Brighton's offence, which remains scoreless. Rather, the Tsunami returned a punt for their lone scorer of the year so far. This win keeps the Saxons in the race for the post-season, while the Stingers' victory against Reading keeps them hot on the tail of the undefeated Portsmouth Destroyers. Our upset alert went off in the first half when the Reading Knights initially took a 13-0 lead early in the game, but the Stingers responded with 20 unanswered points to go into the break at 3-1. Imperial keep a good-looking season going as they travel to Norwich to face a Pirates side that has struggled since their season opener. To be fair to the Pirates, they seem to have plugged some of the leaks in the ship, and though Imperial had a 2-score lead going into the 4th, they were unable to close out the game despite trips into UEA red zone. The Pirates were able to claw back a score for both their first point since their season opener, but also to put a scare on the Immortals as they looked for an onside kick. UEA appeared to be on the mend, and we'll be looking forward to another tilt against Rural right back from the Christmas break as an opportunity to get some wind beneath their sails. But at 1-4, playoff football is looking very unlikely in a strong and competitive southeast. To Division 2, and with the Hawu game pushed back, we only saw a single fixture in the Borders as the Edinburgh Napier Knights hosted the worryingly depleted UWS Pyros. The Pyros made the trip with only 18 players, but to their credit completed the full fixture and even kept the Knights' admittedly fairly slow and steady offense somewhat in check through the early part of the game. That said, the Knights did have 2 passing touchdowns in the game, reportedly the first time that's happened since actual Knights were fighting in Scotland. And the Napier defence put in a second shutout of the year along with a wealth of turnovers and other tasty statistics. All that said, with only 8 games having taken place in the Borders so far this year, it's pretty tough to get a clear grasp on the state of play in this conference. In the north, the Bears bounced back from their half-time forfeit against Liverpool to put in a convincing win against a young Chester Romans programme that's clearly having a hard time getting up to speed with the rest of their rather competitive conference. The Legion have experienced a number of issues with injury, though the hope is the Christmas break will give them a chance to find their feet ahead of a daunting meeting with the Bangor Mud Dogs in the new year. in the Midlands, and it was absolutely a game of two halves as the two teams we expected to be the top competitors in this conference went head to head. For the Colonials, who had shocked the league by dropping a game against MMU in week 4, this was an absolute must win, and indeed the two teams seemed evenly matched through the first half as they closed out the second quarter with the Jets holding only a narrow 9-6 lead. However, coming out of the break, and whatever Coventry's coaching staff said to them during half-time talks, they ought to write a motivational book about it because the Jets took off in the second half, piling on score after score to which Lincoln clearly had no answer. Coventry rolling out 42-13 victors and going into the break with both a perfect record and looking every bit worthy of the number 1 spot in the Div 2 power rankings which they reclaimed in recent weeks. Heading to the southwest, and Tirano finally got an opportunity to make some noise as they rocked a much depleted Bath Star Bulldogs team 30-0. Even so, the Bulldogs' spirits remain high and they seem to be embracing their underdog status this year with a newfound belief in their programme's potential to learn and grow. Meanwhile, OBU finally picked up their first win of the year. They've weathered the storm of opening the season against the top 3 teams in the conference, and despite an injury-depleted roster, managed to make big plays when it counted most to take a win away from the Bournemouth Bobcats. With their 2 remaining fixtures coming against the Bulldogs and Aberystwyth, the Panthers are looking on course for a strong 3-3 season following the debacle last year's suspension made of 15-16. It'll be a big blow to the Bobcats, who put themselves in a strong position to make a playoff run after beating the Blitz. However, they still have an opportunity to clinch a berth with wins in their remaining fixtures and make the top of the conference exceedingly confusing in the southwest. If they can find ways to get wins against both Aber and Bristol, we could see multiple teams sat at the same record come season end. Obviously, there were no games in the southeast this weekend, as there's still no sign of the Dragons so far this year, and the Mariners refused to leave court against the Phoenix without a Bafra crew present. As such, we close our coverage of the weekend's Uniball fixtures in the south, where the UCL Emperors continue their impressive rookie year with another comfortable win over a more experienced programme. The UCL side won't soon forget the beating they took against the Stags, but that takes nothing away from the fact that they're 3-1 going into the break in their first ever season in the league, including 3 shutout wins so far. Finally, the Burners lit up the Sentinels for a very festive 40-diddly win in their final home game of the regular season. Considering the Burners' offence looks to dominate the game clock, they mixed things up a bit this week by passing for a couple of scores and taking in a couple of pick sixes, with their D being utterly dominant throughout the fixture. As noted, it's the Week 10 matchup between the Burners and Stags that now looks like the make or break fixture for this conference. So that's all the Uniball for this week, but we're not done there. There were some strange goings on north of the wall this Sunday as elves took on reindeer and an entire team of Mentor Ace Venturas squared off against Mexican wrestlers and, yeah, not gonna lie, I have no idea. Oh god, it's coming closer! Anyway, the point is that it's all for a really great cause. Coach Alex Patterson, who's been a major contributor to the British game over the years, shared with the community earlier this year that his daughter Elizabeth had been diagnosed with a retinoblastoma behind her left eye. At the time, she wasn't yet even 2 years old. The response from the Britball Nation has been all we could have hoped for, and this weekend's fancy dress tournament hosted by Carnegie Football topped up a wealth of fundraising over the past few months that will help to support Alex, his wife Corrie, and most especially little Ellie through this troubling time, ensuring she can receive the very best treatment available as the family make regular long trips down to Birmingham for treatment. The event itself raised over £700 to go alongside over 15,000 Canadian dollars raised via a GoFundMe page set up by Coach Patterson's family and contributed to by those from across the breadth of the Britball Nation and beyond. If you've been touched by Ellie's story, or Coach Patterson's been a part of your Britball life, or you just want to do a good deed for another member of the Britball Nation at this festive time of year, you can still donate yourself at gofundme.com/Ellie Patterson. We know this is often a cash-strapped time of year, so even if you can't spare a donation yourself, you can still help out by just hopping over to the page and giving it a quick share on your social media platform of choice. All that said, it's been another awesome week of awesome balling across the Britball Nation, and we'd once again like to thank all the teams that got in touch with footage and information. Remember to like this video to help others see it, give it a share on Facebook to show off your big plays to your friends and family, and of course subscribe if you haven't already. That's most of the Britball done for 2016, but we at DC are going to look to keep putting content out up to and into the new year, so stay tuned for some more on that coming soon. In the meantime, play hard, play safe, and let us know what content you'd like to see from us to fill the break in Britball through the festive period.
to be alive. This feeling's running